It is August the 7th, 1485. This is Mill Bay in the far west of Pembrokeshire. A young nobleman is sailing to the land of his fathers. He's been in exile in France. His mission is to capture the crown of England. He may be half English and a quarter French, but he makes no secret of the fact that this is the land of his birth. For the first time, a self-proclaimed Welshman will become King of England. Under the dynasty that he starts, Wales will be united with England, and for every generation of Welsh people to come, the consequences will be immense. But what exactly that means in the coming 2.5 centuries will depend on who you are, whether you're a wealthy landowner or one of the ordinary people.
Henry Tudor is sailing to Wales to meet his destiny, a battle with the English King Richard at Bosworth. It's the culmination of a bloody struggle for the English crown between two power-hungry clans, York against Lancaster, the Wars of the Roses. And Henry comes proclaiming his Welsh blood and asking his fellow countrymen to take up arms with him. En route, his supporters sew a homemade flag for Henry's army, the Tudor colours of green and white, with the fire-breathing Red Dragon of Wales. But if Henry thinks the Welsh peasants and the Welsh gentry will flock instantly to his side, he'll have to think again.
Wales is in a pitiful state and has been for 200 years. No proper institutions, no court, no capital, no real means of steering her own destiny. And that's before you factor in the Black Death, which has wiped out 1/4 of the population, the endless failed harvests, and the terrible suffering. So is there any cause for hope? Well, not really. The son of destiny, Owain Glyndŵr, has risen up and been defeated.
As Henry sends out his lieutenants to rally the Welsh gentry, they move into a land where life for the Werin bobl, the peasants, is as nasty and short as it is anywhere in Europe. But Wales is different in one crucial way. As a conquered country, even its wealthiest families are excluded from power and influence in the highest courts of the land. If there are some small signs of progress since the days of Glyndŵr in church life, architecture and poetry, they hardly amount to a great leap forward. In the towns and villages Henry's forces pass through, Haverfordwest, Fagwr Lwyd, Cardigan, people's lives are dominated by age-old rituals and beliefs. After the defeat of Glyndŵr, some are bound to wonder if a new son of destiny is on the march. But perhaps it's the gentry above all who might be persuaded that Henry Tudor is the man to restore their fortunes. When he reaches Aberystwyth, Henry's path turns eastwards towards the heart of England, and his knights are bringing back to him promises of support.
All the same, the people's response is rather lukewarm. There's a story I'd like to share. It's a bit of local tradition, really, which hints at how tricky things were for Henry. He's on his way from Machynlleth to Welshpool, and he stays the night here, at this house. It's called Mathafarn, and it's owned by a man called, wait for it, Dafydd Llwyd ap Llywelyn ap Griffith. Let's call him Dafydd for short. Dafydd is a poet. He also has the gift of prophecy, or so it's said. So it's a perfectly natural thing for Henry to ask him the direct question, will I gain the crown of England? And Dafydd simply can't answer, until his wife chips in and says, you might as well say yes, because let's face it, if he fails, he's not coming back here. So in these parts at least, confidence in Henry is rather fragile.
Still, the only way for Henry now is forward to his destiny at Bosworth. But if Wales is slow to come to Henry's side, his English allies are even slower. Right up until the decisive moment of the battle, the fate of the whole enterprise and Dafydd's prophecy is in doubt.
Henry's army is outnumbered by at least 2 to 1, but Richard divides his forces into 3 groups. In contrast, Henry keeps his force together to withstand the initial attack. Richard still has men in reserve, so he orders his second group to attack. But the men don't move. Has the king been betrayed? Richard gambles his life by charging across the battlefield to try to kill Henry. The move backfires. Richard and his bodyguards get separated from the rest of the army. More of the uncommitted troops join Henry's side, and one of Henry's lieutenants drives a spear through the king's heart. So who kills Richard? Who delivers that fatal blow? We'll never know. But there is a potential clue carved into this magnificent bed. It belongs to a Welsh nobleman called Rhys ap Thomas. One look at it tells you that he's a man of means. I want to look at the intricate carving around the edge of the bed. It tells us the story of Rhys ap Thomas's rather exciting life. And focus on this section here. 2 knights charging at each other. A horse here which has lost its shoe. And that could easily be a reference to Richard, who is famously unhorsed in the Battle of Bosworth. And in Shakespeare's version of that event, cries out, "A horse, my kingdom for a horse."
So is this the bed of a man who killed a king? All over Wales, there are now people who are happy to see the Tudor triumph at Bosworth as a Welsh triumph. And Henry is genuinely indebted to Rhys ap Thomas and those Welsh landowners who've supported him. Henry himself comes from Welsh gentry stock, the Tudors of northwest Wales, and they're one remarkable family.
Henry Tudor would have grown up with tales of this place. This is Penmynydd in Anglesey, one of the seats of his family, who'd served the Welsh princes 3 centuries before, and who'd fought for their cousin, Owain Glyndŵr, in his great uprising. And Henry no doubt would have been intrigued to learn how his grandfather had met his grandmother. Owain Tudor, that's Owain ap Maredydd ap Tudur, had fought for the English king, Henry V. And after Henry's death, well, Owain somehow managed to catch the eye of Henry's widow, Catherine of Valois, Queen Catherine, The story is they were at a dance together, he was a bit drunk, she took a fancy to him. That's Welsh charm for you. But let's pause a second, because there's a danger that we're getting slightly carried away. Henry VII, Henry Tudor, the great Welsh hero. Is he? It's not clear. He's a quarter Welsh. Yes, he is born in Wales. He spends most of his life away from Wales. There's no evidence that he speaks or understands Welsh. Yes, he does have a red dragon on his banner, but then he has lots of banners, and it is a detail on his royal crest. I think it's fair to say that he takes the English crown for himself and for his family. It's not some great act of liberation for the Welsh people. In effect, he becomes just another English king. And yet that royal magic seems to do the trick. Because what happens is that the people of Wales believe, they desperately want to believe, that they have a special connection with Henry Tudor. And not just with him, but with his son and grandchildren. The future Tudor kings and queens, from Henry VIII to Elizabeth I. And it's the vigour of that Tudor bloodline which transforms England from a bit of a backward kingdom to a major world power. So I'm going to dare to suggest that the British Empire starts here.
Henry's first son is born the year after Bosworth. Henry calls him Arthur, a name linked by now with claims to the English throne, but one steeped in ancient Welsh history too. Henry sends Arthur here to Ludlow in the Welsh Marches and makes him Prince of Wales. He's going to be schooled for his future as a monarch by ruling a principality. And it's a complex task. Though Wales has been conquered and subdued, things are still different here. Even the Marches, the most accessible parts of the country, are not part of the English legal system. They're governed by the Council of the Marches, which has its headquarters in Ludlow. And the plan is to get the young Prince Arthur to run it. In 1501, Arthur marries Catherine of Aragon, but the following year, he dies suddenly. When his younger brother Henry inherits the crown, and his brother's wife, the anomalies of governing Wales come to prove unacceptable to a king who keeps his realm safe by firm central control. But Henry VIII has plenty of other things on his mind, famously religion and marriage. And it's 20 years into his reign before he's able to sort out the matter of Wales.
This is where the story of Wales changes course. It's a seismic change set out in this Act of Parliament demanded by Henry VIII. It joins the government and legal systems of England and Wales. In other words, it is an act of union. And for the first time in history, this document is on Welsh soil, here at the National History Museum in Cardiff. And I have to say, as a Welshman, it is a very powerful experience to be able to touch this document and to read some of its content. For example, henceforth, no person or persons that use the Welsh speech or language shall have or enjoy any manor, office or fees within this realm unless he or they use and exercise the English speech or language. So simple and so unthreatening laid out before me here, and yet this is the most important document in the entire story of Wales.
And while I'm at the museum here in St Fagans, I'm taking the chance to learn more about this essential chapter in our story from Professor Geraint Jenkins.
Well, Geraint, here we have, I think, one of the prime symbols of the Act of Union. What is it?
Well, it is indeed. It's a justice's chair from the 16th century. It's an emblem, really, of the new Wales that is dawning, a new Wales in which English becomes the language of law and administration, and English becomes the language of the courts. Let us imagine, Hugh, that you broke the law, that you stole a handkerchief and you were brought before your betters. An English justice coming from England would sit in judgment on you. You were a monoglot Welsh speaker, would not understand a word of the proceedings, but you would give your evidence in Welsh and it would be translated into English. When the verdict arrives and the judge condemns you to death, you would then be hearing the verdict and hearing the condemnatory address from the Chief Justice in a language you do not understand.
Was there not some kind of boiling anger among people about what was going on?
Not really, because there might have been, of course, amongst the werin bobl, but it's the gentry that are calling the shots. And they're the ones who benefit from the Acts of Union. They see that this is going to help them build estates, it's going to make them the local governors, they'll have a voice in Westminster, they will become the top dogs in Welsh society. So they're saying, to all intents and purposes, bring it on.
Are there any clear benefits to Wales from the Acts of Union?
Well, if you were a gentleman, certainly there were benefits for Wales. You know, you look at what the spin doctors for the gentry are saying. They're saying that Wales and England live in harmony. That no country in England, that's striking, isn't it? No country in England has flourished as much as Wales after the Union settlement. So they knew that they were the major economic beneficiaries of the Union.
Geraint, for the first time, the Act of Union is on Welsh soil. What does that mean to you?
Well, I don't know about you, Hugh, but I've been having goosebumps because this document has had a huge psychological effect on the Welsh people. We habitually use the phrase, despite ourselves, England and Wales. I bet you never say Wales and England any more than I do. It's a dictum, really, that starts with the Act of Union. Then again, the fate of the language, that something is very, very important to us both, because Welsh is our mother tongue, both of us, and we worry about the fate of the language. That again stems very largely from the language clause in 1536. So I think this is an act which over the centuries has embedded itself in our minds and in our hearts and in our souls. It's very, very important in the story of Wales, and I think the story of Wales would have been very different without it.
It's worth pausing a moment and thinking about the lives of those who are subject to Henry's laws. The population of Wales is just under 250,000. That's about the size of modern Cardiff. 9 out of every 10 of them don't speak or understand English. There are some towns with a few thousand residents: Carmarthen, Haverfordwest, Brecon and Wrexham. But the vast majority of people live off the land, away from the towns. Most people never have the luxury of travelling far from their own parish. Their lives are focused on a tight locality, a filltir sgwâr, their own patch, something that's still so important for many of us in Wales. Tudor society has a formal structure. Below the nobles and the gentry are the yeoman farmers, who own their land and work on it alongside paid labourers. But the backbone of society is the class of tenant farmers. They rent land from the rich, and they can be thrown off it if they can't pay. Their families are large, but disease and food shortages mean that many of their children never survive to adult life.
Mum! Mum!
And in the face of tragedy, they hold to their traditional beliefs. Wales is a Catholic country. The Welsh are known across Europe for their devotion to the Virgin Mary. Their Christian practice sits alongside the faith they have in more ancient rites and rituals, like the healing that can be had from holy wells and springs. But there is a big religious change coming in the reign of Henry VIII, driven by his ambitions and by his sex life. Henry's marriage to Arthur's widow, Catherine of Aragon, and then his desire to annul the marriage, sparks a break with the Pope in Rome. And Henry uses the split to get his hands not just on a new wife, but also on money and property, and lots of it. Henry is targeting the monasteries, places like this, the Abbey of Strata Florida near Tregaron. He's attacking places which for centuries have been pillars of Welsh life, where monks have chronicled our history and supported our princes and poets.
What happens is perfectly lawful. Henry's made sure of that. But he is responsible for the destruction of some of the greatest buildings in Western Europe, and they now lie in ruins. It's an act of state-sponsored vandalism on an epic scale. And here in Wales, the damage is more extensive because that link between the monks who lived in these places and Welsh learning and culture is now broken.
Every part of Wales is affected by Henry's break with the Pope. It suits those Protestants who want to smash Catholic practices here. And they target 6 places of key religious significance. One of them is Penrhys in the Rhondda. A miraculous wooden statue of the Virgin Mary is said to have appeared here. This modern statue commemorates the tradition. Henry's enforcer, Thomas Cromwell, knows that they'll need to move very carefully. This is one of the holiest places in Wales.
Pilgrims came here across land and sea, according to the poets. They came to bathe in the water of the Holy Well. They came here for healing of body and of mind. But by the 15th century, there was also a statue of the Virgin Mary, which was said to have appeared as if by a miracle. It was found in an oak tree. It was the Virgin Mary with the baby Jesus in her arms. She's bending over to kiss him. She's the Queen of Heaven, but she's also an ordinary peasant woman with her baby in her arms. I think that was what spoke to the ordinary people of this area. She was one of theirs.
The pilgrimage to Penrhys, its wooden statue and its holy well, is hugely popular. Miracles are said to happen here.
It's easy to look back at that now and to write it off as superstition. But this was a belief which ran right through society, from kings and princes right down to the peasants. This belief that if you travel to somewhere that holy things have happened, holy things can happen to you.
But for the Protestant reformers empowered by Henry VIII, beliefs like these are not just superstitious, they endanger national security.
For them, the destruction of shrines like this was a priority, no matter how beautiful they were, no matter how much people loved them. In fact, precisely because they were beautiful and people loved them. So Thomas Cromwell wrote in the summer of 1538 to a local landowner, William Herbert of St Julian's in Newport, and told him to come to Penrhys and to destroy the shrine. When he got here, he had an audience. So what he says in his report to Thomas Cromwell is, I explained to them what they were doing wrong, I told them how they were dishonouring the king and God, and I took the statue away. End of problem. strange thing about his story is that it took him 3 weeks to write up the report. And when he wrote it up, he said the statue was still in his house in Newport. Now, that statue was hot. It could have sparked a rebellion. What's he doing with it still in his house?
But if Herbert is having second thoughts about Penrhys's miraculous statue, there's no evidence that anything comes of them. The wooden statue is taken to London and it's burnt to cinders. The shrine is destroyed, the pilgrimage stopped. The well, of course, doesn't dry up, and local people keep using it. They say it's very good for making their butter churn. And local traditions about the well survive.
You can come here and find there's plenty of water. You can come here and find there's hardly any water at all. The locals say the water flows when it wants to. So there is still something about Penrhys, for all that Thomas Cromwell felt that it was a dangerous place and needed to be destroyed.
But Penrhys's national significance as a place of healing and inspiration has been brought to a sudden end. And the religious upheaval goes on throughout the whole Tudor period.
Let's take a look inside this church to explain the confusion for so many worshippers. Henry VIII, when he dies, still considers himself a Catholic despite all his troublemaking. His son Edward is a Protestant, his successor Mary a devout Catholic, and Elizabeth I a hardline Protestant. What does all that mean for these churches? Well, things which have been familiar for centuries disappear by royal command. No more shrines, no more relics of the saints, no more going on pilgrimage. Even the language of worship changes from Latin to a mix of English and Welsh. And the most visible signs of change are here, on the walls around us. Because the churches go from being richly ornate and decorated in a splash of colour to being plain and white and simple. And then just as people are getting used to that, back comes the colour in all its glory. And then not long afterwards, it's gone, disappeared, and the walls no longer have a story to tell.
Of course, the church doesn't change everything overnight. And worshippers don't depend solely on wall paintings for their understanding of the gospel. They're already used to hearing sermons in their own language. But it's vital for them to keep up with these twists and turns in what they're meant to believe.
The business of religion in Elizabethan Wales is a matter of life or death. It's as simple as that. We have acts of violence, we have foreign threats against the state, we have security breaches, we have displays of extremism. No surprise that a toxic mix like that produces its own victims.
Queen Elizabeth I, a Protestant, is on the throne, and some of her subjects refuse to give up the Catholic faith. Richard Gwyn, a school teacher from Montgomeryshire, is one of them. He causes a local outrage.
Richard Gwyn, in May of 1581, is brought to this Anglican church in Wrexham. 6 men drag him into this building. They are determined to make him listen to an Anglican sermon, but he's having none of it. They bring him to this area near the pulpit, and they put him in shackles. And in a show of defiance, he rattles those chains so loudly that the voice of the preacher can't be heard. And for that, Richard Gwyn is punished. He's taken outside to the public stocks. Even then, he doesn't lose his strength of spirit. He's taunted by a local Anglican clergyman who says, "I have as much authority as the Pope in these parts." Richard Gwyn replies to him very clearly, "St. Peter was given the keys to the kingdom of heaven. You've clearly been given the keys to the beer cellar."
Two years later, Gwyn is convicted of attempting to convert others to the Catholic faith and of treason. He's brought to the town's beast market to be hanged, drawn and quartered. It's a cruelly painful and bloody process, being butchered while still alive.
When Richard Gwyn is hanged, he appears to be dead. But when he's cut down, he revives and he remains conscious throughout his disemboweling. His final words, in a cry of anguish, are these: "Iesu, trigar haurthiv." Jesus, have mercy on me.
4 centuries later, in 1970, the Catholic Church declares that Richard Gwyn is a saint. Others in Wales are more in step with the Tudors. They flourish under the Elizabethan settlement. The Wyn family established their seat here in Gwydir Castle, near Llanrwst in the Conwy Valley, and they have quite a history. Just after the Battle of Bosworth, one of Henry Tudor's great supporters, Maredydd ap Ieuan ap Robert, finds the money to rebuild this castle. Maredydd is descended from the ancient kings of Gwynedd, and he now founds this dynasty of his own, the Wyns. After Henry VIII smashes the monasteries, the Wyns pop down the road to Mynant Abbey and find just enough Gothic rubble lying around to build a fine new porch and gardens in the latest style. One of the best-known residents of Gwydir becomes a real mover and shaker in London. She's Catrin of Berain, Catherine of Berain, and she's famous for marrying 4 times, though some say she did murder her first 3 husbands. She moves from Wales to London to Antwerp and back to the court of Queen Elizabeth, where she's a trusted confidant. With 6 children and scores of well-connected relations, she becomes known as Mam Cymru, the Mother of Wales. And it's not just Catrin who's making a mark in London. The Welsh are everywhere, networking, influencing, socialising. We can think of them perhaps as the biggest ethnic group in the city, thriving in this cultural melting pot, Shakespeare's London. Queen Elizabeth is more concerned with the Welsh who stay at home in Wales. To get them to buy into her Protestant revolution, she gives them something very precious, a Bible in their own language.
Well, for generations within Wales, the idea was that Elizabeth had done this out of the kindness of her heart, out of a particular care for the people of Wales. Because the Welsh, of course, identified very strongly with the Tudor dynasty that had originated in Anglesey, that was seen still as a Welsh family. So they thought that this was an act of particular benevolence. Now, in reality, of course, Elizabeth and her ministers had very good tactical reasons for wanting to produce the Bible in Welsh. Elizabeth was a Protestant queen. She was facing all kinds of potential threats from abroad, from Catholic nations, particularly Spain, from the Pope. So she was intent upon ensuring that the Welsh would become good Protestants.
The Welsh Bible is early. It's only the 13th language in the world to get its own translation.
Well, when we look at the 1588 Bible, you can see, to start off with, its size. It was a pulpit Bible. It's a large Bible. It was never intended to be read at home. It's not the sort of thing you can take with you to bed and read a chapter before going to sleep. It was intended for use in the churches. There were about 1,000 copies printed initially in 1588, just about enough to supply the parish churches throughout Wales. And they cost £1 each. which was a lot of money at that time. They were very often kept chained to the pulpit within churches so that they weren't stolen, because there were some Bible thieves around at the time. But this, in a way, is the start of a process then of actually making sure the Welsh people were familiar with the contents of the Bible. They would hear this Bible from the pulpit every Sunday.
Most of the translation is done here. Llanrhaeadr y Mochnant is far from any library or centre of learning. But the task has fallen to the vicar, William Morgan, who begins the enormous enterprise in the late 1570s.
He was working by himself night after night while also taking charge of his parish. He was committed to the idea that it should be the best possible translation, and that meant going back to the originals. It meant using the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament. So it's not surprising that it took him until 1587 to produce a draft that could go to the printers in London, because at that time, of course, it had to be printed by the Queen's printers. The print setters, of course, the typesetters, probably had no familiarity with the Welsh language whatsoever. So it was necessary for Morgan to be in there every day, checking the work and rechecking.
But William Morgan's triumph is not just his attention to detail. It's also how natural he makes the whole Bible sound in Welsh.
The Welsh that would have been used in the fair, in the marketplace, in the tavern, probably not completely suitable for the Bible. So one needed to elevate the language a certain amount above that, and to produce something that was more elegant and more dignified. But you needed to strike a balance with an everyday language that people would appreciate and would immediately understand. So that when they were hearing this Bible in church, it would immediately strike a chord with them. They would immediately get it in a way that they hadn't before, because it had been in English or prior to that in Latin.
Mae amser I bob peth, ac amser I bob ewyllus tan y nefoedd. Amser sydd I eni, ac amser I farw, ac amser I blannu, ac amser I ddiwreiddio y peth a blanwyd. Amser I law.
Nothing resonates more powerfully for me than the words of the Bible in my mother tongue.
Amser I wylo, ac amser I chwerthin.
And this goes to the heart of William Morgan's towering achievement. Here we are in the church of Llanrhaeadr y Mochnant, where he addresses his flock over many years. What he does is he gives the Bible a new credibility throughout Wales as a vehicle of faith.
Amser I ryfel, ac amser I heddwch.
By the end of Elizabeth's reign, the Welsh Bible brings the country into a much closer alignment with the monarchy and its Protestant settlement. But not everyone is focused on spiritual matters. Ports like Tenby are about to enter the commercial age, dealing in high-end goods like gloves and taffeta. Trading with Portugal and Morocco, the merchants of Tenby are every bit as wealthy as those of any similar port in England. Tenby's merchants can offer lower tariffs and boast of more efficient service. They're making money and living lives of some style and ease. But away from pockets like this, commercial development in Wales is slow. And that holds back the growth of the latest strain of the Protestant faith, which is sweeping through England's trading towns. It is called Puritanism. But some well-off families are drawn to this new form of dissent. Some leave the Church of England believing it is still too close to Catholicism. Take the Pritchards of Llancaich Fawr in the parish of Gelli Gaer near Pontypridd. Colonel Edward Pritchard is a devout Puritan. He joins a Baptist congregation in Eglwys Ilan. The Pritchards have lived at Llancaich Fawr for generations, and their colourful family history offers a real insight into life in Wales at this time.
It vexes me that you are thus displeased, my lord.
Edward has married Mary Mansell, daughter of a wealthy family from Briton Ferry. Their household boasts 15 servants who live in the manor house. Colonel Pritchard's right-hand man is the steward.
What does the bailiff have to say of this?
It's been confirmed by the bailiffs.
Unlike the other servants, he's an educated man who can speak English. He has a good grasp of husbandry and the law.
Master James, you are to give the court the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help thee God, and by the content of this book.
He helps Colonel Pritchard in presiding over local court cases in the Great Hall at Llancaeach Fawr.
Of rents.
They settle rent disputes and minor misdemeanours.
Aye, indeed it has. It doth also seem to me, good sir, that you are in contempt in some measure.
Dispensing the king's justice, it seems, is part of God's work. The family does make time for leisure and entertainment. But Colonel Pritchard is about to be caught up in a brutal struggle, a clash of ideas between two bitterly opposed forces. A civil war which will shake the foundations of the state. It will pit Parliament against the Crown. And it will put a king's life in jeopardy.
The Pritchards aren't the only well-to-do family in this part of South Wales to become enthusiastic Puritans. Here in Whitchurch, a very busy suburb of Cardiff today, the Williamses also embrace the cause. One of the Williams boys marries into the family of Thomas Cromwell, who used to be Henry VIII's chief minister. And that man's son, Oliver, decides not to be known as Williams, but to embrace the Cromwell surname. That's right, Oliver Cromwell. This is the man who leads the Puritan fight to overthrow the monarchy. And it's a bitter irony for him that most people in Wales, even those who abandon the Anglican Church, like the Pritchards, are on the king's side.
Before hostilities end, Edward Pritchard will join Parliament's side. But when civil war breaks out, his instincts as an officer of the Crown impel him to take up arms for the king. In the middle of the campaign, he'll have a very special dinner guest here at Llancaeach Fawr. King Charles himself.
It's counterintuitive for us today who think of ourselves as a socialist, left-wing, Republican-esque sort of place. In fact, we were thoroughbred royalists. The Welsh actually liked their king, King Charles. Lots of places in England, of course, felt that he was doing something seriously wrong with the government of the whole country, with the government of the church. There are elements of that in Wales, yes, but in fact they see King Charles as their king. Kingship is something that the Welsh have taken on board as their own since the Tudor period. What they like even more, I think, is their church. The Church of England, ironically, is very much the Church of Wales in this period. The Church of Wales, which has been thoroughly Cymricised. It's in their own language. Their sermons, their liturgy, their faith is truly Welsh. Now, Charles, of course, represents the head of that church. Parliament looks like it's challenging that church. It wants to bring in more of a Puritan type of worship.
Charles's recruiting sergeants are helped further by the way Parliament talks about the Welsh. Simple, ignorant, stupid, simply following the king because they know no better.
Do you really want to fight and die for a bunch of people who are calling you an idiot?
The Welsh aren't idiots, but they have backed the losing side. By 1646, the king is in prison, and the outcome seems to be settled. Well, not quite.
After the fighting is stopped, we get a battle over what was the war about. And what does victory mean for the parliamentarians? Does it mean that you have the king as a mere figurehead with a radically reformed church? Wales in particular gets very, very worried and jittery about what they see emerging out of Parliament. Radical voices calling for the complete transformation of their beloved church into something that they simply couldn't recognise anymore.
Cromwell's radicalism is alarming his own supporters. The mayor of Pembroke is one of them. He's John Poyer, a merchant, just the kind of person who's sympathetic to Puritanism. Surrounded on all sides by royalists, he's held the castle for Parliament. But now he's having second thoughts.
Poyer's wondering, I think, what he's fought for. He also has an added grievance with Parliament. They aren't paying him what he feels that he's been owed for standing on their side when he was this island of parliamentarianism.
Pembroke becomes a springboard for a renewal of the war. Supporters of the king rise up across the whole of Britain. This time, Poyer is fighting against Parliament. He's been promised that royalist reinforcements are marching across the country to be with him.
What does come his way, however, unfortunately for him, is Oliver Cromwell and the New Model Army, who sweep through South Wales, defeating royalist forces as they go, principally in the Battle of St Fagans, and end up outside these walls, where they raise a siege. They don't really have the firepower to demolish the place, and for several weeks, Cromwell is camped outside here with perhaps 6,000 men. Poyer and his associates are inside with a few hundred.
From May until July of 1648, the castle holds firm under the siege. In the end, Cromwell brings up the biggest guns he has to threaten the medieval ramparts. The game is up. With two other rebels who've been at his side, Rowland Larn and Rice Powell, Poyer surrenders himself to Puritan justice.
They are taken before a court-martial and tried. They are found guilty of treason, all three of them. They plead for their lives. And the Council of State, which is the body effectively in charge of the country at this time, agree that justice will be served if only one of them dies. And so they decide to draw lots. In fact, they have a child choose the lots for them. On two pieces of paper are written, "Life given of God," and the other is blank. And Poyer is the one that pulls the blank sheet of paper out from the child's hand, and she asks him, "Did I do well?" And he looks down at the child and says, "Yes, you have done very well."
Poyer faces the firing squad in April 1649, and Wales's resistance to Parliament dies with him. But from Pembroke to here in Caerphilly, Oliver Cromwell doesn't feel secure in the land of his fathers quite yet.
He's known as God's Englishman, some might even call him God's Welshman, but Cromwell, after winning the Civil War, in which Caerphilly Castle plays a very small part, orders his army to slight the castle. And the damage they cause may well be responsible for the famous leaning of the southeast tower. Forget Pisa with its 4% drift, Caerphilly can boast fully 10%. It's worth having a look if you have the inclination.
Cromwell is determined to get the Welsh to take Puritanism seriously. His parliament passes an act for the propagation of the gospel in benighted Wales. Scores of mainstream Anglican clergy are thrown out of their churches, replaced by enthusiasts for the new cause. But in the end, the calls for a Puritan Wales will fall on deaf ears. The monarchy is restored, and the gentry are free to behave more and more like their English counterparts. As a new century dawns, the distance between them and the Welsh-speaking Werin bobl seems greater than ever. Perhaps that's why the Welsh countryside is seen as a backwater, stagnating economically, lacking the vitality of urban life which develops in England in the 1700s. It's a picture that Nia Powell, an expert in the agriculture of the time, is keen to challenge.
Quite often Wales is described as an impoverished country of subsistence farmers. Well, that's not true at all. What you find in the uplands in particular are entrepreneurial farmers, if you like. And I think that's where the real wealth of Wales lay.
Well, that's an intriguing thought, because I've grown up with the notion, obviously the wrong one, that it's the farms down on the valley floor which are sort of making the money, and it's the poor people at the top. That's wrong, is it?
Well, I think it's quite interesting. If you look at people's wills, their wealth at death, the average wealth of a yeoman in Carnarvonshire before 1700 was £26. If you look at the average for a very upland parish, Beddgelert, where Snowdon lies, the average was £99. Now that's a colossal difference.
Are you saying there's much more money to be made on the uplands than down here on the valley floor?
Well, that's the surprising thing, really.
These upland cattle farmers, with their nose for business, sense a gap in the market for a new product.
From around 1715 onwards, sheep, the numbers of sheep suddenly start to increase. It may be because of the development of the woolen industry, but in Snowdonia, the sheep that are noted by travellers weren't wool producers. Many of them were black sheep, and black wool wasn't really favoured for weaving, but they were noted for the sweetness of their meat.
The strength of the rural economy is beginning to support business growth in urban Wales.
Places like Denbigh that produced far, far more gloves than were ever needed in the whole of Denbighshire. Wrexham, for instance, which was the biggest town in Wales.
Wrexham hosts a weekly market where trade between England and Wales flourishes.
Short-haul drovers, the people who brought animals to the market, meeting drovers from over the border who took them down to places like Northampton to fatten up. London butchers liked what were called Welsh runts. Runts because they were small, but they fattened very quickly, and their meat was considered to be very tender and very good to eat.
Changing tastes are one thing, but the real revolution for ordinary Welsh people is not to do with farming, and it comes down south.
Something here is on the move. It's gathering pace, and it's a remarkable phenomenon. And it's driven by two dynamic forces, religion and education, and led by two dynamic people, Griffith Jones and Bridget Bevan. And together, they help to make Wales one of the most literate countries in the world.
Griffith Jones is the rector of Llanddowror near St Clair's. His idea is to set up a school in one village, get the people to teach each other to read, and then move on or circulate to a neighbouring hamlet.
You teach your friend here to read, he teaches somebody else to read, and then somebody else, and on it goes and on it goes.
And the key thing is, they're doing all this in the only language that 9 out of every 10 people understand, Welsh. Before long, these circulating schools are active in huge numbers.
3,495 schools had been set up.
How many? 3,495? That's an amazing number.
When Griffith Jones dies, his wealthy benefactor, Bridget Bevan, carries on with the work. And by then, their schools are famous. A report on them reaches Catherine the Great in Russia.
When you consider the raw figures, they are astounding. Half the population of Wales learns to read in these travelling schools. It is a towering achievement. And what is the first thing that most people want to read? It is the Bible. For the first time, they're able to study the gospel message for themselves. And the effect of that, in this sleepy Carmarthenshire countryside and much further afield, is electrifying.
It's what we call the Methodist revival. Dynamic preachers like Howell Harris and Daniel Rowland draw thousands to meetings in the open countryside. Methodism begins as a movement within the Anglican Church, but before long its converts are breaking away to build their own places of worship.
1740, that's very significant because it makes this chapel, this cause, one of the earliest Methodist causes in this part of Wales. So let's have a look inside. Diolch yn fawr, Llew.
One of the features of non-conformist denominations like Methodism is fervent hymn singing. The revival boasts probably the greatest hymn writer of them all, William Williams Pantycelyn. His words still ring out around our rugby stadiums today.
This old chapel, in the heart of the countryside, is part of an immense force which transforms life in Wales. The Methodist preachers who address this congregation revitalise the Christian faith in this country. They make it a central feature of people's lives. And while that experience is alien to many people today, it is certainly part of my family's story, and many other families too, and it is without question one of the most important chapters in the story of Wales. Och chi'n sôn am Morgan Rhys te, Llew, a wi'n mynd I ofyn I chi nawr.
Llew Jones has led the singing in this chapel for more than half a century. With a little persuasion, he's agreed to sing for me the words of Morgan Rhys, another great local hymn writer from those days of the revival.
Dewch hyn ac ieuenc dewch at Iesu mae'n llawn bryd.
So we've reached a significant moment in our unfolding story of Wales. For the first time, we can hear an echo of our past, handed directly from generation to generation through people's memory and experience. This chapter in our story began with the coming of a new claimant to the English throne, descended from a Welsh family. The Acts of Union passed by his son give the Welsh gentry equality with their English counterparts, but condemn ordinary people to justice in a language they don't understand. It's the Welsh Bible which binds them closer to the crown and to its church. So when civil war breaks out, a Puritan parliament can't persuade them to join its religious revolution. It's the remarkable campaign to teach ordinary people to read that prepares the ground for a fervent new form of Christianity. The Welsh embrace it as their own, just as a new rural economy promises a more prosperous future.
250 years after Henry Tudor marches through Wales, on his way to claim the crown of England, the drovers are also on the move, taking their livestock to market in London. That coupling of England and Wales is now a reality. But things are changing. Wales is going to be transformed and become a global leader in the shaping of a very modern world.